Today is Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. A big update on the war with Iran. That top story and more coming up on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, all that good stuff on your podcast platform of choice. Really helps us out. Appreciate that. You can always email us too. We enjoy hearing from you, as we are glad you're with us getting through the news of the day. We're here every weekday bright and early. And that email address is quickstartpodcast@cbn.org, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. With me today to get through all the news of the day, CBN's Trey Phillips, and on the focus story, a legendary British comedian is warning against Islamic ideological takeover in Europe.
Yeah, he's an interesting person to be doing it, like we were just talking about, Dan, because he's not a Christian, not necessarily that conservative, but he's sounding the alarm on Islamic ideology taking over Europe. So we'll break that down here in a minute.
All right. Details on that coming up in just a moment. All right, on the main thing. Is something shifting in culture? One prominent Christian voice says there's a growing hunger for truth, meaning, and something deeper. Ruslan KD joins us coming up on the main thing. I'm going to talk to you here about CBN News, and we bring you news from a Christian perspective. And the only way we can continue to do this is people like you deciding to partner with us. It's very difficult and expensive to actually cover the news and to do it really well and to do it the way God would want us to do it, in a God-honoring way, and to show what is going on truthfully in the world. And that's what we strive to do here at CBN News. But we rely on partners like you to chip in and do that. So if you feel blessed by CBN News and you have felt informed and encouraged by our coverage from a Christian perspective, go ahead and check the link in the description of this podcast episode, or you can just go to cbnnews.com. There's a Give Now button in the top right side of that page, but we got the link in this description for you, and you can give one time, you can give monthly, and we would just really appreciate that if you considered it, because we're here every day trying to bring you truth and the news from a Christian perspective, because that's what we believe in. And we're praying for all the things going on in the world. We're praying for our viewers. We're praying for people around the globe. We're praying for different stories that are happening all the time. And so if you're blessed by that and you feel called to help us out and keep it going strong, just go to cbnnews.com, click that give button there in the top right-hand corner, or you can find that link here in the description of this podcast episode. All right, we're going to go to the news in 90 seconds now, and a fragile pause, but a major military buildup is underway in the Middle East. President Trump's 5-day window for diplomacy with Iran's now in motion. Even as U.S. forces continue ramping up the pressure, the administration says Iran has agreed to never pursue nuclear weapons, a key condition for ending the conflict, though Tehran is publicly downplaying progress and is not fully committed to talks. At the same time, thousands of U.S. Marines are heading to the region, with additional forces from the 82nd Airborne reportedly being considered for rapid deployment. Those troops could be tasked with securing the Strait of Hormuz, or even seizing key oil infrastructure as U.S. warships and amphibious units move into position. And Washington gridlock drags on. There's no end in sight in the DHS shutdown. Senate Republicans are scrambling to end a nearly 40-day shutdown of Homeland Security, but divisions on both sides are making a deal tough to land. The GOP proposal would fund most of DHS while holding back some immigration enforcement money, hoping to win over Democrats, then pass the rest later on a party line votes. But Democrats say it's not enough, demanding more limits on ICE operations, while President Trump himself is signaling he's not fully satisfied with any deal on the table. You can check out those stories and more over at cbnnews.com. And Trey, I mean, these are things that regular Americans are dealing with every day. You know, Billy's been out a couple of days. He's traveling. He is promoting his new documentary investigating the supernatural angels and demons. Great documentary. And if you want to check out that great documentary, just go to cbn.com/supernatural. I'll put that link in this description as well. Really, really awesome stuff, and Billy's done a great job. But he's out and he's experienced these lines because he's been flying around to different spots, and it's just getting crazy, and people are feeling that pain. You want to travel somewhere, you're going to have to sit at the airport for 3 hours. And then we see the tragedy that happens, and no word officially yet if that's related to any staffing shortages or anything, but we had the runway tragedy the other day, and man, it's, hopefully that this impasse can be cleared up soon, because this is the sort of thing that impacts millions of Americans.
The longer these things drag on, the more real world impacts they have. And obviously we're starting to see that. When it's short lived, you really don't necessarily notice it. It's just a blip. But when it's gone on and on and on, it becomes, like I said, a problem. And I think really it's just at this point frustrating. I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on. It's just frustrating to see both sides in whatever situation it might be, playing political football with something like this, because it's impacting people's day-to-day lives. It's also impacting people's jobs, right? The people who work for some of these agencies, who work in air traffic control, all of that, their jobs are impacted. Many of them have had to move on because of past government shutdowns. In fact, that's why we're kind of in the place we're in now with such staff shortages with the TSA and with air traffic control, because so many of them just moved on. Like, well, okay, I don't know when this government shutdown's going to end, so I'm either going to retire or find a job somewhere else. And it's left the government scrambling. And I think we're seeing some of those impacts lingering on now with this additional shutdown.
Yeah. And again, praying that it'll hopefully come to some sort of agreement here soon and things get back to operational and moving along so people can get to where they're going. All right, going to go to the focus story now. And, we've seen a lot of cultural clashes going on in America, but it's preceded us here, what we're dealing with in the UK, and it's really amplified over there as you're seeing a lot of intense cultural clashes. I mean, I think in Germany, there was Christmas celebrations interrupted by Muslims running around the street, shouting Allah Akbar and all this stuff. So what did John Cleese say about what's going on here?
Yeah, so John Cleese, obviously best known as a comedian working on the Monty Python series of films, he argued that Britain has been shaped at a deep level by Christian values. He wrote on his X account, acknowledging the historical mistakes made by the church and churches, and not everybody's perfect was the point he was making, but he emphasized that centuries of British society has been influenced and built upon the teachings of Christ, the teachings of the Bible, which this is interesting because Cleese himself is, at least to my knowledge, not a Christian. I don't even think he's that conservative. In fact, some of his earlier work with Monty Python, he faced a lot of criticism because some people said that his work was blasphemous toward Christianity. He's, of course, pushed back on that and said it wasn't blasphemous. But the point being is that he was somebody who, at least in his earlier life, was pretty critical of Christians and of Christianity. But as he's aged and now in the second half of his life, he's seen a lot of value in Christian principles and in biblical ideals. Again, not to say that he's adopted them as his own. That's ultimately, as believers, what we'd like to see is all people, including John, of course, to come to the saving faith of the gospel. But he does at least see the value and the common goodness that Christian principles have afforded society, especially in his context, British society. And again, he said all of our values in the West have been built upon the teachings of the Old Testament, the New Testament specifically. He said the teachings of Jesus. And he warned that if those values were to be replaced by any, especially Islamic values, which is the largest looming threat, as you alluded to, Dan, Britain, he said, would fundamentally change and would no longer be Great Britain.
And so what kind of sparked Cleese to make these comments right now?
So he was responding to remarks by Susan Hall, who is a conservative politician in the London Assembly. She stressed the importance of preserving Britain's identity as a Christian country. She also raised concerns about her colleagues across the aisle in the Green Party of England and Wales, which has reportedly, according to several outlets, considered disestablishing the Church of England as the official state church should the Green Party assume power in this next election. So this broader debate certainly reflects ongoing tensions in the UK about religion, national identity, and the role of these established institutions, especially, again, as this massive influx of Muslim immigrants is coming into all of Europe, but specifically in Cleese's situation, coming right into Britain and the UK.
And so what's the larger context here going on in the UK when it comes to so-called Islamophobia?
Yeah, so the British government, I wanted to talk about this because it really is kind of the heavy cloud looming over this whole thing. Is the British government recently introduced a new updated definition of Islamophobia, which it's now calling anti-Muslim hostility, which essentially it partly covers stereotyping or treating Muslims as a monolithic group, or saying things that could anyway cast aspersions on Muslims as a whole. And of course, I mean, if you're hearing this, you're thinking, well, okay, you're painting with such a broad brush. This could be really could have a chilling effect on people who are wanting to either A, just be critical of some Islamic ideology, or even B, more importantly, Christians who are wanting to share the gospel, which is, of course, contrary to Muslim and Islamic teaching. So, reported by Christian Today, the definition has drawn criticism from some in the UK who argue, like I just said, it's too broad and could ultimately restrict free speech. Among them was David Robertson. He warned that such policies might eventually be used to suppress Christian expression like his own, suggesting that preaching religious beliefs and sharing the gospel with people on the street could ultimately, if that power was put into the people with the wrong motives, could be then mischaracterized and intentionally twisted as hate speech rather than just sharing the gospel.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of a tenuous situation there. And I think we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but I think this really boils down to the whole idea of, I mean, this political correctness when it comes to groups and these group identities. So much so that people are afraid to call out basic things like not assimilating into the culture that you're moving into. It's fine to have immigration if people come here, adopt our cultures, adopt our practices, and generally, by and large, live by those. But when they come here and then demand other people here to cave to their cultural standards, that's where things get really dicey. People are too afraid to say anything. And then next thing you know, you've got all of these crazy things happening and people running roughshod, and you've just got to stand up and stop it when it's happening. When you see all of this influx with no assimilation whatsoever, in fact, hostility to the country and the ideals that country has, claiming it's horrible. And that's why it's so damaging that you see a lot of people, particularly on the left, who've criticized America and all the mistakes America's made. And so they're just constantly criticizing America. And then you don't see as many. That's why I think it was very refreshing when President Trump came in, regardless of where you stand on him, that he kind of came in with a let's celebrate America attitude, right? Again. And it honestly felt like, wow, I haven't heard that in a while. Didn't it feel like that when he came in? It was just kind of like, we're just used to yelling at America and everyone's taking a knee and it's so bad here. And so I think people are starting to see that mindset is very, very damaging to actually what is great about America.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think celebrating cultural differences and everybody's heritage, I think that's great and is important, especially as believers. We know that God intentionally created different people groups with different cultures and different ethnicities and different, whatever. I think all of that stuff is great, but that's not our strength. Our strength comes from being united around one common ideal. And I 100% just echo what you said, Dan. Immigration is a great thing, but you have to then assimilate. I think it's important that we come together as one and celebrate. Man, I really want to get behind the values as an American. I believe in these fundamental principles, which again are rooted in Scripture, are on a Judeo-Christian foundation. I want to get behind those things. And what I think the problem is we're seeing in the U.S. and certainly seeing in the U.K. is people who are coming and wanting to co-opt the culture. Say, well, I'm not going to change it all. In fact, you're going to bend yourself to affirm me and to accept me the way that I am. And that just doesn't work. That's how a society crumbles.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we certainly need to be praying for not only the UK, but like we often see, the things that are kind of bubbling up in the UK and in Europe often make their way over here. And I think we're seeing that hold true here as well. So we need to be praying for America in that regards as well. So appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today. And we're going to go over to the main thing now. And Christian creator Ruslan KD, He's got a really big YouTube channel, a lot of younger audience there. Does a lot of episodes on theology and things going on in sort of Christian culture out there in America. Really great stuff. You should check out his channel. But he's seeing some real signs of spiritual interest rising again with church growth and renewed curiosity about faith. But he also warns that deep skepticism toward institutions could shape how that plays out. Joined Billy to break it all down on today's main thing.
All right, the Bless God Summit. We are here. You are doing this year two.
Year two.
What's the motivation for this?
I have seen immense value in my own personal growth and development when my routine and my patterns are disrupted and I could get away and have time to think. And so if I'm traveling, if I'm going to an event, if I'm doing things that are outside of the mundane, even a road trip, I just get this clarity. And then usually in those moments, I'll kind of know, oh, these are the next steps I need to be taking in this thing I'm building over. And I know a lot of people don't carve out time for that sort of stuff. So I said, man, what if we could carve out time, create a weekend for people to go see some of their favorite speakers and artists and performers, and hopefully impart something in them in terms of both information, but also an opportunity for transformation, an opportunity to respond. And so I'm a byproduct of like, man, someone once upon a time gave me a free ticket to a Dave Ramsey Entree Leadership Conference here in Carlsbad. It was a $5,000 ticket. There's no way I could have won. And it was right after I got out of debt as I transitioned into being a full artist. And one, getting to be in the room was massively life-changing. And then two, getting to meet Dave Ramsey was huge. And it gave me enough to persevere through a really hard season of being a full-time independent artist in 2015. And so I just know events are powerful and can help people. And we do our events at very nice locations, as you could see. And that's because I know my audience. I know a lot of these folks work hard. They're blue collar. And they're not going to carve out time to get recharged and refreshed unless it's connected to something like this. And so it's like, we're getting them here, but they're also staying extra. They're hanging out. They're seeing the beach. They're going surfing. They're enjoying themselves. And
It's a vacation.
It's a vacation.
Yeah.
They got their kids with them, and so we have a kid room that my wife built out and brought toys in and, is doing stuff for. And so, so that's why.
So, you're blessing other people through this. How does it bless you? Year two, you're watching it happen. We're here in real time. How does it encourage your faith?
Well, I think often as a YouTuber, I'm in my garage and it's just numbers. It's like, 1,000 people are watching today, or a video did 100,000 views in a day. But when you're disconnected from 1,000 people is a lot of people. And so this becomes a way that blesses me to remind me of, hey man, this is actually meaningful. This is not just being an influencer. Like, this is actually impacting people for the good. And so it blesses me in knowing and seeing the people and that like lives are being changed. And it's worth it to sacrifice for it.
Yeah. All right. So you talk a lot about culture. You talk a lot about the church, right? I want to talk about two things, positive, negative. And so let's start with the positive.
Okay.
When you look at what is happening the past year, the past 2 years, since 2023, in the culture, particularly when it comes to faith, what is the most encouraging thing to you?
I think there's a hunger for things that are deeper. I think there's a hunger for things that are meaningful. I think there's a hunger for spiritual formation and walking in I would say the truest sense of reality. Whereas I think prior to really prior to COVID, we just kind of floated and did our own thing. It reminds me a lot of the time right after 9/11. You're about the same age, so you remember that. But there was this like clarity that seemed to have came over people, and they were curious and interested. And I would say it's like that, but more so. Like, I'm seeing 9/11. I remember the Sunday after, it was packed. And then it's kind of like
within a month and a half, it was like everybody was fighting again. But that month was.
We saw a drastic uptick right after Charlie Kirk passed, got tragically assassinated, to a consistent sustaining and growth at our church. And I don't know if that growth was already happening, but we saw a bump, like a noticeable bump, where our church has doubled from this time last year, more than doubled now. Yeah, and that's been awesome. It's been really good.
All right. On the flip side, what is it that concerns you the most? And it doesn't have to be just the culture. In fact, I'd love to hear culturally, but also in the church, because you look a lot at the church.
Hyper skepticism of all institutions. So the other side of COVID, hey, we're going to flatten the curve in 2 weeks, and wear a mask, don't wear a mask, wear a mask, like all of that. And then all of that amplified, and people are like waking up that like, hey, like these people that are in power and in institutions, they're not always good faith actors. They're not always honest about what's happening. And so because there was actual critique of actual things, that then has led a cascade of we're just asking questions. So we're just asking, and sometimes it's just stupid questions. They're stupid, dumb questions.
Or they're leading.
Or they're leading, and you actually have a conclusion, and so you're just asking them questions. I think that's the part is when you look at some of the just asking questions, I think they're bad faith. And I think because people are either ideologically captured or so disillusioned with institutions, that it is actually leading people down a hyper conspiratorial rabbit hole. That's one, not good for their soul. And two, not good for their life. Like it's not good for your soul to view the world through this paradigm, but it's also not great for your life, because if you have this defeatist, the system is rigged, little guy can't get ahead, American dream is dead, like that belief will cause your actions to reflect that. And that's I think that the concern is like everybody has a voice. And so it's not what's true and what's good and what's beautiful. It's lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life, amplified. And that's the part that's concerning.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And we're seeing more and more of that. And a lot of younger people, if you're talking maybe 20 to 45, let's say that range, but even on the younger end of that, they're really believing a lot of this stuff, or they're willing to entertain it, right? Because it is the question that is leading, and it's leading them towards a conclusion intentionally. And we've seen a lot of that since Charlie Kirk, right? We don't have to get into the specifics of it, but we know that there's a lot of that going on. How do Christians step in to correct that? Because a lot of people are staying silent because they don't want to offend their friends and loved ones. It is difficult, and you don't want to hurt your friends' feelings, but yet you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, this is wrong.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say. I'm shocked by how many non-Christians and people who don't necessarily follow the same Jesus, but are willing to acknowledge that things are wrong. So I think I'd actually be shocked on how many people will lock arms with you right now and say, yeah, that's wrong. Like what happened to Charlie Kirk, that's wrong. Like you can't justify that. And really the only people justifying it are the people that are radicalized and ideologically captured. I think there's a clear divide in some of that. And so I think being able to agree and lock arms and say, yeah, no, there's some things that are just flat out evil. You'd be shocked on how that's a segue to say, well, if there's an evil, then it has to be good. And if there's good, then there's a God.
Yeah. All right. Apologetics is a big theme here at the summit. And obviously that's important. When you look at apologetics, what are some of the best tools right now that we have? Maybe even unique tools. And I don't want to lead here, but the supernatural is one really interesting area. We're seeing people look for evidence, right? So what are you seeing right now in that respect?
I think apologetics is effective most when it's paired with a transformed life. And so I think it's one thing to have all the answers and be a know-it-all. It's another thing to have a changed life and the fruit of the Spirit on you, where you then provide the answers, but they know you're different. They know you're growing, you've transformed, God's working on you, you react to situations in ways that are unhuman at times in terms of the patience you show, the mercy you show. I think apologetics becomes a great tool with that transformed life, right? And so, First Peter talks about live such good lives among the pagans. So they accuse you of doing wrong. They see your good life and your good deeds, and then worship God on the day He visits them. So like our good life. And so I love when apologetics meets virtue. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to bridge here. Like our first day at the Blessed God Summit is all about a worldview, apologetics, theology, philosophy. And then day 2 is virtue. Pull out those vices and replace them with virtue.
I love that. Yeah. And that when I said supernatural, that's what I'm referring to, that changed life. I mean, when you see somebody who was a drug addict, who was a porn star, who did all these things, and suddenly they're following Jesus and they're completely changed people. That is supernatural. That is not something that happens naturally to people.
Absolutely.
And so I love that you guys are tackling that. Okay, final question for you. At the end of the day, after this summit, and I know there'll be more of these events, what is success to you?
Man, success for me is one, knowing Jesus and knowing that He knows me. Success is my family is healthy and happy and within arm's reach. And success to me is having the margin to take risks to do stuff like this, you know, and to risk big and say, yeah, we're going to do this. And it's an investment into the kingdom. It doesn't make sense on paper, but we know that the Lord is in it and the lives are being changed.
All right, Billy, appreciate that interview there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We are looking at 1 Corinthians 13:7 today. It says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I think it's a great reminder in our day and age. Also, though, we got to be certain we know what the meaning of love actually is. It doesn't mean abandoning or softening truth. It just means being compassionate as we share the truth.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean just a feeling you get, like a quiver in your liver, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I think people forget. They think like, oh, love falls out of the sky and lands on you. No, it's something you actually have to do and you have to apply because it doesn't come naturally to us as sinners in a fallen world. We tend to be selfish. So it's something we have to ask God's help with for sure. All right, so we're going to leave it. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. God bless. Enjoy the rest of your day.